about things that we need to do. Every project that you're going to see discussed here this evening is something that is on the agenda for the town at some point in time. Okay? So, Rich, if you want to go through. So, if some people, actually there might be some people in the room who are part of the long-range plan. In 2000, the town of Long Meadow authorized the study of the long-range plan. Some of it was town money, some of it was grant money, but that was a 4-year process that laid the framework for what the town should be doing going forward. And other than some low-hanging fruit that we took and converted, that plan has been sitting on the shelf for roughly about 10 years that I know of. The heavy lifting of it hasn't gone through, and some of the things that were actually in the long-range plan, you're going to see a little bit, or brought back this evening. This was the committee that served on the long-range plan. Some of the names you'll know and recognize. So, what we're looking at is enhancing, expanding revenue sources for the town, looking at cost efficiencies for the town of Long Meadow, while also looking at all the services and what we need to provide for the residents. In this concept, what you'll see is ideas, and there's actually going to be an action plan for the select board to look at this with. This is a map of the town, obviously, and what you see highlighted in red are the parcels of land and buildings that I'm going to be talking about tonight. There's about 8 pieces of land / buildings that are encompassed in this concept. Rich, if you want to go on. So these are the highlights. And as I said, I'll take your questions at the end because some of them are going to push some buttons. We're going to look at developing the water tower property in this concept for new fields, athletic fields. One of the things on our agenda this evening is expansion or redevelopment of Wolf Swamp Fields because of the growing soccer and lacrosse programs in town. It's going to look at developing a DPW site on the existing Wolf Swamp Fields while retaining roughly about 12 acres of that land for baseball fields. Repurpose of Grand Meadows. It's the tennis club down on Dwight Road. Again, think about it as a concept. And that would be a multi-use sports complex that would be open year-round for residents. The repurposing of Blinn Courts to commercial property. New Williams School, combining the middle schools between Glenbrook and Williams. The repurposing of Glenbrook for a new Council on Aging facility / community center. And the repurposing of the Greenwood Adult Center in its present stage into new municipal offices and consolidating people out of the basement of the community center and town hall. And then at the very end of this is something to look at is what could we do with the town hall building and the community house, in addition to looking at the Cordis property as a part of it. These are all projects that are on the long-term time horizon, short and long-term time horizon for the town of Long Meadow. Okay, the schools, the Council on Aging, we have a warrant article that's being presented or that is being presented to the Select Board for approval for a study of a new Council on Aging facility. Expansions of fields, as I said, up at Wolf Swamp, and the middle schools and the DPW facility are all part of what's already on the list. So what we have right now is if we go along with what we have and how we do things in town, the status quo, so to speak, there is no revenue enhancements in here. There is some cost savings with some of the programs that are already on the board, but what we're looking at is enhancing revenue. And the idea behind it is this is going to cost the town some money, and hopefully this is something that will bring in some revenue for the long term for the town once the projects are done and paid for. These are the numbers that we have right now that we're dealing with in this year's warrant. The Blinn tennis courts, DPW there's a warrant article for $1 million, or it's in the budget for $1 million of repairs down there. We have the boilers at Williams Middle School. The adult center is already, these are projects that are going to be done in the adult center that we've continued to do. The Wolf Swamp Fields are $35,000, and it looks like that's just the first phase of what is looking for there. Community house improvements of $54,000, and that's it. That's what we have on the budget. We have about over $2.25 million worth of projects that are on this year's agenda and on this year's town meeting warrant proposed that hasn't been voted on yet. So when we look at the water tower properties, this is what it looks like from the sky. There's 2 parcels The green lines on the map are water and sewer hookups, so that's just showing you that. The plots are houses, but that is 20.1 acres. And the select board has already charged the town manager to look at what we need for an existing bylaw change to put that back into, out of the auspices, the Park and Rec and the school department for development, okay? What this does is, also on the agenda is $35,000 for reconfiguration of Wolf Swamp Fields because of the needs of the programs that are expanding there. What this does, it gives Park and Rec the ability to have a blank canvas on how to develop these parcels for fields. And if you could go, so what that does is once the fields move there, if you can go to the next slide, I'm sorry, we have our outcomes. So it actually increases the land that Park and Rec would use for fields by 14 acres because of the size of it's 2 acres larger than Wolf Swamp, plus the land that would remain at Wolf Swamp under park usage. We can develop a concession stand there to generate some revenue for the sports programs, just a little bit nicer than perhaps what's at Wolf Swamp right now. And it ends up meeting the expansion of the recreational needs. Baseball is a declining program in town, if you talk to Park and Rec, with soccer and lacrosse growing. And soccer and lacrosse requires the field space. This would also take into consideration moving the DPW facility to the fields at Wolf Swamp. Right now, what we would need is about 6 acres worth of land off of the fields at Wolf Swamp. And as you can see in here, if you can see it, there's some of the shadows on there are the baseball fields that are existent. One baseball field would be lost, but there's also one baseball field that's technically what we would be reconfiguring now, but there's still room for park, and this is 12 acres of land that would be left to Park and Rec. Both of the fields, and what we're talking at the water tower property and what we're talking about here at the fields at Wolf Swamp would be, we would put in irrigation. Because if anybody's ever coached up there, played up there, if there weren't weeds, there'd be no grass. It wouldn't be green, rather. So we would need to irrigate these to make them what they can be. This could remain a baseball complex, so to speak, where it's dedicated to baseball, where the new fields are dedicated to lacrosse and soccer. So it gets the DPW out of the floodplain. That's one of the things that we talked about. It was in the Ty Bond report. It's in the 100-year floodplain. And what that just means is that in the height of an emergency, our vehicles and our building would be, not the vehicles mainly, we can probably move those, but the vehicles certainly would be underwater. It has multiple access points to the community for DPW versus the one they have now. It eliminates the purchase in the property and the loss of revenue that goes along with the purchasing of that property. And it allows conversion of the old DPW facility into a photovoltaic field. Solar field. A few years ago, we were proposing putting in photovoltaic solar panels into what was the Old Town dump. That was 4 acres and expected to save the town $240,000 in electricity. It couldn't go on because the electrical connect to the grid was too far away. The electrical connect to the DPW facility, which is about 6 acres of land, is about 100 feet from where we are, somewhere around there. So it makes the project feasible, and it's a larger project than what was being proposed for at the old dump. So that alone was going to produce $240,000 in savings for the town. Rich. Oh, our new inshore. So the next project would look at taking ownership of the Grand Meadows Tennis Club. This would allow for year-round use of a tennis facility. Part of this on the far right-hand side has been there was a fire there. There was actually a tarp over the roof. And if you have some sort of an open mind and a plan, this can be converted into an indoor turf field for rental purposes and programs for Park and Rec. This particular facility can generate more than enough revenue to pay for any loss of tax revenue that would happen by acquiring the facility. It would give tennis players year-round access. There's the ability for Park and Rec to generate camps throughout the year as opposed to just summertime. And you can have baseball, softball, lacrosse, and boys and girls lacrosse, rather, working out in there right now versus where they are. Right now, our tennis team, there was an alert now message, as the boys' tennis team was practicing down at Grand Meadows today because obviously the courts are still frozen over. So it expands their services to the community, year-round tennis play versus 6 or 8 months out of the year, depending on weather. The fee enhancement program is much larger there, and again, Park and Rec would be able to tell you what they could look at for it. It offers a consolidation. Perhaps Park and Rec's facilities or offices move there. That's something that can be considered into the plan. And the growth of recreational opportunities, again, through camps and so forth, is a highlight of that property. The next one would be to look at repurpose of Blinn Courts, and it would turn it into, in this concept, into commercial space. And what that looks like is that parcel of land is bigger than the footprint Big Y sits on right now. It's about half of the size of the shops. So again, I don't have an answer of what would go in there, but if you have a concept, an idea that perhaps a two-story building, similar to what you see in the shops with some retail on the bottom and commercial space up above, or office space up above, something like that could go there. But again, that footprint is larger than the Big Y footprint that we have in town today. That building could potentially generate in the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars, not a little bit more than $100,000 in revenue to the town, if that were to become a commercial property. It's probably the most coveted piece of land in town. Obviously, it sits in the commercial district. We talked about the new tax and revenue, and right now that you're looking at $750,000, potentially a little bit higher for the refurbishing of or rebuilding of the Blinn tennis courts. Rich, you want to go on? So on the agenda also is, or will be, the school committee has reconstituted the middle school working group. And it was a program we had statements of interest in for the middle schools. They were polled, I think maybe 2-3 years ago, and they will be coming back at some point. And we'll be looking at what do we do with those two existing buildings. More than a few years ago, there was a decision made to put fifth grade classes back into the elementary schools. And if you look at some of the decline in population, what it does is it allows for the combination of one middle school to serve the needs of the community. Where it goes, whether it's Glenbrook or Williams, I'm choosing Williams just because it's a concept. It could go to the land at Glenbrook. But what it does is it allows for the building of that school, whether it's new, renovation, and let me be very clear that if this were to come to pass, there would have to be a separately appointed school building committee that would do work on this from start to finish, just like they did for the high school. So this is not something that would be under the auspices of the select board or anything like that. There would have to be a separate school building committee, just like we have for the high school. So they would determine whether or not it would be one high school. They would determine whether or not where it would go, what location it would be, and it would have to be done with the state as well. So there are some advantages of that, with the consolidation of some services. We have a consolidation of staff, perhaps. There are some savings in the utilities and in the structure itself in terms of boilers and that type of thing. And there are numbers that can be attached to it at some point in time when it's looked at seriously as something that, if we did consolidate, of what those savings could be by having one school. So this would take, and again, we're looking at Williams, this would take Glenbrook and repurpose it for a council on aging / community center. Okay, that building's handicap accessible. Obviously, what we're talking about is some work would have to be done on the inside to make it, or freshen it up, so to speak. But it allows for we keep the gym, we would keep the auditorium, and the gym space is still used for basketball in that example. But what it does is there's a huge footprint there. There's the ability even to look at some sort of development potentially for 55 type plus housing. So when people are talking about my kids are out of the school system, what am I paying for in property taxes? There's plenty of land there to look at that in some shape or form for the town. There is some revenue enhancements potentially with property taxes if that were to come to pass with with a development. As I mentioned, we have the cost savings with the combination, and where it's located in the community would have low impact on the neighborhood. This would then take the municipal offices if Council on Aging were out of Greenwood and combine those offices to the Greenwood Center. What you see is just the footprint of the driveway and the parking lot. That doesn't include the fields, the park that's there, the playground, just the consolidation of offices within the Greenwood Center for all of the town. It's more of a efficiency of delivery of services to the residents. Right now, we have employees working in the basement of the community center in probably what I would call less than ideal conditions. It's certainly not a sweatshop, but it probably does. But I know it doesn't lead to a cohesive environment. We also have on the agenda within the next couple of years renovation of town hall for the separating the clerk/collector's office. That was on the agenda once. It was pushed off, but it's coming back due to there's some sensitivity of handling money and so forth down there. You want to go to the next one, Rich?
This was the impacts over there. Do you want
Okay. Well, I mean, it's convenient for the residents in the sense of they're all in one building. If Park and Rec is part of that, they have the daycare up there, which is also part of their program. It's a little bit easier to get to, and if you move the elections out of the community house, whether it's into one of the school buildings or into Greenwood, which would become the community center, and the gymnasium, which is bigger than what we operate out of the community house, you have the ability to look at this. And this is really what would be looked at the tail end. If you go to the map, these two pieces of property directly attached to the Cordis property, which was talked about at the select board level last year, about the potential for purchasing that and developing something in that area. If they're not being used for town activities, there's a potential to repurpose those buildings. What they would be, I have no idea. That's not what I'm looking to do. So when you're looking at this particular program, but if you look at it, it's a big piece of property that attaches with Cordis, and it allows for the rental specifically of the town hall, for example, but also of the community house, of what it could potentially be for the community. Whether we talked about it again at the select board level of it becoming a banquet hall that would serve as a function hall throughout in town, and again, it's something that could be outsourced in terms of the management of it. So there's three action items that I would ask the select board to look at. One of them we're in the process of doing, which is taking a look at the bylaw change that would need to go into effect or need to be voted on at town meeting to change the usage of the control of the water tower property back to the town for purposes of looking at some sort of development. The second step would be to look at the Wolf Swamp Fields. And again, there would need to be a bylaw change and an act of the legislature for a change of purpose of that land. And then the next step would be to appoint the steering committee. And the idea and the concept of the steering committee is that the steering committee would vet some of these projects. And the steering committee would look at this plan overall and say, is it feasible? Is it something that the town should explore? And that steering committee, in my opinion, would be something that is appointed by the select board, reports back to the board, and I'm talking within a period of 3 to 6 months coming back and saying, is this something that can make sense for the town? If that were to happen, and the select board agreed with that, then we would go along the lines of holding up those forums, seeking the public input, working with the various committees in the town to put together a well-thought-out plan for this particular concept. How this came about is over the years of talking to people and looking at the various things that we need to do. If you connect the dots and put together a plan on a piece of paper, it's a lot more achievable than taking a look at doing one of these projects at a time. So if you think about the DPW facility, it's been on the agenda for a long time. It hasn't gotten done, and it's an issue of money. When you put the plan together, what you're looking at trying to do, and again, it doesn't have to go in this way, it doesn't have to go in this order. But what it is a concept on paper that if it's developed, it makes sense for the town to move forward with all the projects. They're going to happen at some point in time, but if we think about it the right way, we can actually generate revenues to help pay for some of those projects. And I'll give you an example. You're sitting in the administration wing of the high school. We never had the conversation, if we could turn back the clock, of saying we should have a second floor here that holds municipal offices. But we didn't do that because we were looking at what was right and wrong, what was money, and it was a money issue. And it was a fight over who gets what first. So if we take the blinders off and we actually take a step back, and this is looking at Long Meadow from a 5,000-foot level and saying what could go where and how can you do it. And if we don't, in my opinion, what you're going to see is just the same challenges that we've had every year, where there's a fight over money. There's going to be which is going to go first, and we're going to have town meetings that'll push off projects for the next 20 years. What this does is it answers a lot of the needs of the various demographics in town. It doesn't say that it's not going to come for free, but these projects, just so you understand, are already on the horizon. Some of them will be potentially voted at town meeting this year, and others will be 5, 6, 7 years down the road. So this concept, and what I'm looking for is people to, while you might not like any individual item in there, is the concept of having a plan that's on the table that says, yes, we want a steering committee to go forward and take a look at this, because that's the only way that we're going to get this done in town. These projects are going to total somewhere between 40 and 50 million, roughly. And again, they're already on the horizon. So whether or not we have revenue enhancers in here or cost savings measures for the town will determine how much of a financial impact we'll have for each and every one of us. So I just want you to understand, it's a concept. It's not something that's in stone. It's something that I'm going to be presented to the select board once the budget's over, and then ask the select board for those 3 simple action items. It's not asking for funding. It's not asking for anything other than look at the bylaw changes we need, what do we need to get everything in order, and put together a steering committee to see if anything like this is actually even feasible. Okay? So it's a little bit after 20 after 6. At 6:45, I'm going to end this. If there's any questions, we'll take them, but at 6:45, we're going to stop and let the room clear out for the select board meeting that starts at 7. Oh, and I just want to say this. The only thing that's going to stop this is if we keep talking about what do I get first. Okay, and I can tell you that on last Thursday, for example, we had a select board meeting in which it was brought up that perhaps we should take $150,000 out of free cash and fund a site study for the DPW building. And that's great, except we don't have a site for the DPW building. Okay, and it didn't go further than that. But we need to get away from that short-term reactionary type of judgments or decisions and take a look at this on a long-term level. So with that, I'll take any arrows you got. The only thing that I would ask you is if you, for LCTV purposes, if you could come up to the microphone and just state your name so they can, because if you ask from the crowd, they said they won't pick you up. So if you can just do that, that's fine.
Susan Altman at 661 William Street. The Blinn courts dedicated to Bob Blinn are used by our entire population. The gym classes in spring and fall use the tennis courts. The tennis teams, boys and girls, including the J varsity in spring and fall, use the courts. Matches against other high schools, as far-reaching as Boston schools, are constantly used. Bay Path uses and pays for using our courts. Nelta tournaments for women and men use our courts. Summer programs for children, evening as well as mornings for children and adults in the summer, spring, and fall all use the courts. We have an $80 million high school and are now seriously thinking of not having courts. All the high schools in the entire area, far-reaching from even where we live, all have tennis courts for the high school. The indoor club is in need of lots of work to bring it up to par, and it certainly doesn't have enough courts to cover destroying the ones we have, plus the fact, how do we bring all our gym classes and little children over there? It's not convenient. This means that the only people who will be able to play outside will be people who belong to a club. How elitist is that? Paul Santinello suggested we take back our government. Well, I'm completely in favor. Perhaps we need a change of government if our executive branches make these ridiculous suggestions, to which will be costly to our citizens.
Thank you, Susie. I just want to make one thing clear, folks. First of all, and I think I made it very clear, this is not a select board proposal. So I want to make sure everybody understands that. It's not the executive branch that has come up with this particular proposal. It's me. So
You didn't mention the price of
No, listen, you can say whatever you want to say about me, but the select board, this is not them for them to take flack over it. What I forgot to mention, and I apologize for that, is on the Blind courts, I'm sorry, at the Grand Meadows Club, there's 8 courts inside. We have 2 courts up at Greenwood Center. We have 4 courts over at the Clay Courts at Bliss Park. Again, all I'm going to say about projects is this is a concept, and people have to take blinders off and understand that services would be, if you're a tennis player and playing year-round is not attractive to you, then you probably wouldn't like it. But it's a concept. It isn't, as I said, this isn't written in stone. It's not written in. Janet, I think you had a question?
I do.
Pardon? Where's that?
Janet Robinson.
okay.
I just was wondering, obviously you've put a lot of work into a long-term plan, which, we've been talking as a town that we need for some time. I'm just curious as to why you're presenting it to the community before presenting it to the select board. Budget season notwithstanding, I'm just concerned why try to get the community involved before even taking it to government?
Well, it's a good question, and to be honest with you, I asked to start a select board meeting at 6 o'clock tonight, and that was denied by the chair to post a meeting for 6. On the agenda tonight, we have the budget, we have warrant articles, and we have the capital plan. None of which has been voted on, which means our meeting is going to go to 11 o'clock tonight, which it typically does. And I didn't want this proposal on at 10 o'clock at night when no one was watching. So to answer your question, that's specifically why. It's not the budget notwithstanding, it is in 100% because of where we are in the budget process. So,
I guess what I was asking was, why did it have to be today and not wait 2 months to, or after?
it's because I've been working on this for a while, and this is when it's ready. That's the answer. Did you have a question?
Me.
No, okay. Jim, you had your hand up?
Yes. Jim Russell, 108 Bel Air Drive. Paul, how big would the DPW facility be over at Wolf Swamp?
It would encompass 6 acres. That's the size of what we've established in terms of what we need for DPW facility, which leaves 12 acres available at Wolf Swamp.
Okay. And the coming and going of trucks in the morning, at night, and so forth, any consideration of a buffer zone or something for the homes that are on Wolf Swamp?
Well, I think by buffer zone, you mean where it's situated, or?
Well, between where the facility itself would be, you've just got the road, and then you got the houses. There are no real trees, quote, quote.
Yeah, that's what we would, again, what you would think about is some sort of DPW facility in the far back, surrounded by something that takes it away from the street, the site of it takes it away from the street. So yes, again, Jim, I'm looking at it, that was my thought, is it would be placed in the corner with some sort of trees or greenery that takes away the site of the facility more or less. It would have to be fenced in, to protect the assets and so forth. But yeah, I would imagine that would be somewhere along that. Again, I don't have an artist rendition. That particular piece of property was going to be used for garden apartments as part of the long-range plan. There was 3 reasons why they didn't do it: because it would need a bylaw change, an act of the legislature, and it would cut down on fields. So that piece of property was looked at for rental units in town, not something like this.
Okay, next question regarding the tennis courts. If everything were to fly through like you would hope it would, what would you expect Park and Rec to do regarding playing of tennis this summer and fall, spring, summer, and fall? Would you expect us to continue to use the courts that are there, the Blind courts now?
Well, again, here's what I'm looking for in terms of what this is that the select board sets up a steering committee. The steering committee then looks at all this stuff, takes a look at it, and I'm looking for people on that committee far smarter than me that would be able to look at all of this and say, what's feasible, what's not feasible, what can be built, what can't be built. And anecdotally talking to people, a couple people, I can tell you that they can look at a parcel of land and twist it and turn it and have a much different perspective than I can. So the idea would be this wouldn't take effect for a while. But what it does need is to have the steering committee look at something like this and say, does this make sense? Does it make sense? Again, there's an order here, but it was an order of pick something. You know, you can
Yeah.
flip it around and present the same thing. So there is nothing on paper that says we're going to get rid of the Blink courts. There's nothing on paper that says we're building a new council on aging center. This is something that is being presented as a thought for a long-term plan. We don't have this. What we have is a long-term capital plan that says things need to be done, boilers need to be replaced, and buildings need to be fixed up. So this just puts down on paper what we're all thinking about, but just too afraid to look at it. Is there going to be pain for people? Absolutely. So if you're an avid outdoor tennis player at 7 o'clock at night, you know, and again, this doesn't take into consideration that, hey, what if we lit up the Greenwood courts? You know, so there are courts for people to play on, and it's not like we're trying to take something away. It's looking at this in the betterment of the town as a whole versus just one segment at a time. And if we keep going, I'm just telling you, I've been on this board for 8 years, and I've been on the finance committee before that. When you look at it, everybody who's elected will say we don't have the money for something, and it's an issue of who's up for reelection, who wants to do something, and this takes that away. Because if the town can adopt the plan, and Jim, you know, the long-range plan has been around, and we took it, and we threw it on the shelves. You should see some of the recommendations in there. Go find, it's hard to find on the website. I had a search for an hour one night to find it on Google. But if you look at the long-range plan, it's a 122-page document that talks about more than just painting lines around Big Y as one of the issues there. It looked at developing some of this property.
Mm-hmm.
And we just took that, and because there was no fortitude to follow through on it, we put it on the shelf. And there was some significant money and time put into that, far more than what I've done. It was 4 years in the making. And my fear is that if we keep doing the way we're doing business, is nothing gets done. And I don't know how many years it took for the high school to get through, but it took a lot. From the original task force in 2000. Okay?
Thank you.
Phil, come on up. Thank you, Jim.
My name is Phil Hallahan. I live at 74 Eaton Road. You talk about the vision or a task force here, 3 to 6 months to do something.
I made up a number.
Okay, well,
Okay.
I'll make up a number
Sure.
for you. Why don't we, within 2 weeks, appoint the committee to look at that? Give them 90 days to look at what you've put here, report back to you, whatever the 11 items that you went through here, a plus or a minus on each item, and get this over with.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you. I don't know if that's going to happen. No, I love that. Anything else? Come on, Eleanor. After Eleanor, you're next.
Eleanor Stoller, Meadow Road. We are in, the senior center is now in a school. It's not good for us at all. What makes you think that another school is going to be good enough for seniors? I think we're better than good enough after 50 years.
Listen, Eleanor, again, it's a concept. Maybe the steering committee comes back and says, you knock down that building and build a new senior center. I don't know. What I'm saying to you is that
Yeah.
if we're going to go through, there's $35,000 article on town meeting warrant, or
That's
on the
right.
warrant to be approved to go to town meeting for a feasibility study.
Right.
I don't disagree with it.
Hmm.
Okay, what I disagree with is we're going to do a feasibility study and have nowhere to put a council on aging building.
We're working on it.
No, I understand. But everything has to be done, I think, together.
Yeah.
Just keep one thing in mind. It took 10 years,
I was on that.
3 different committees of the high school building committee to get a high school built.
I don't have 3 years. I don't have those 10 years.
No, you
I don't have them.
Yes, you do.
But, and I was on that I wasn't on the committee, but I was involved in those meetings. It was at Bay Path when
For
they
the
did
long-range
that
plan,
original.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I just don't want to have something that goes on a shelf and sits there for another 10 years
That's
before
right.
someone says we need to do something. I mean, I think most people in the room would agree we need to do something with our facilities in town
That's right.
for the different demographics that we're talking about, and it always comes down to money. Who on the select board wants to authorize a bond for $10 million for a DPW facility? Who on the board wants to recommend a $5 million bond for a council on aging building? The biggest obstacle we're going to face is going to sit at this table in 15 minutes, a half an hour. Because some of this takes vision and takes some courage to say, this is what we want to do. I'm sorry, who else had their hand up? Go ahead. Come on up if you're. Oh, great.
Hi, Chris Mazza. I'm with The Reminder. I'm not a town resident. My question was more about the methodology in creating this vision. For example, Wilbraham went through a similar visioning process, and in addition to talking with department heads and things like that, they also talked with the community business leaders and things like that, and was hoping that you could talk a little bit about your methodology in creating this vision presentation.
Okay, well, there was one synapse too many in my brain one night, and all of a sudden these things started to click together. And quite frankly, Chris, if there was a steering committee that came back and said, these are the types of things we should look at, then you literally go through that methodology of talking to department heads about the needs, talking to the various committees in town, school committee, finance committee, you got to look at funding for this. So all of those would come after. In order to set up that type of committee, you still have to have someone buy into some sort of vision or plan. So this just came about because all of these projects are out there, and something just clicked that said, if we put these in some sort of reasonable order, they're achievable and they're deliverable to the residents, as opposed to 20 years from now talking about exactly what we have here. So if you go back and look at the long-range plan, you'll be amazed at what was proposed in that plan. And we did nothing with it. And my goal is to stop doing nothing with this. So if the steering committee came back and said it's feasible, then I think that's the process. You start talking to the various committees, the stakeholders, and everybody else involved. There's community forums at that point to get feedback from residents about things like the tennis courts or, DPW at Wolf Swamp and that type of thing. So again, as I stated early on, this is not a select board proposal. It's my idea that I'm showing. Someone else had their, come on up.
Hi, my name is Barry Brooks. I live on Erskine Drive. About 5 or 6 years ago, Jerry Nolet hijacked me to chair a committee, and we looked into all the expenditures for all the different components of the town, and we found that there were many, many departments that were operating properly and some that weren't, but that's beside the point. But one of the components that came out of this was a long-range study. There was a plan, and I don't remember the numbers exactly, but I think it was around $75,000 was given out to an outside firm to look into a long-range plan. Now, I laud you for having the guts to go ahead with this on your own. It's a good thing. I'd like to see that in people. But whatever happened with that? And I thought, did you just make reference to the fact that it was just dumped and put aside? And I remember part of it, it wasn't all street lines. I mean, they were talking about putting trees up and everything like that. Whatever happened to that?
It's been sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Why?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So to your point, and it might have been 65,000, or maybe it was 75,000. Some of it was town money, some of it was a grant. And as I said,
No, it wasn't a grant. No, it wasn't a grant.
I thought I read that in there, but it could.
Okay.
I could be wrong. But it was a 4-year process. That committee was started in 2000 and went to 2004.
Okay.
And they came up with a plan that was 122 pages long that encompassed a lot of stuff in town.
Okay, second thing, if, don't take offense, if the Blinn tennis courts go down and a building goes up, is that something the town is attempting to put up, or would we look for a private developer to do that himself?
And that's a great thing for a steering committee to address. Absolutely. I doubt that the town would try to be a landlord,
Okay, thank you.
but that's just my thought. So George and Jerry, if we go in that order. Okay, we got 5 more minutes of arrow slinging, so come on up.
My name is George Schmeck. I live at 26 Lees Lane, and I'm here to lobby for a new building for the seniors. At the moment, there are 4,500 residents in Long Meadow that are 60 years of age or older, and they've financed a lot of things in this city, this town, and I think it's time for them to get something. And I would at least like you to put a new building for the seniors on your list. Thank
Okay.
you.
Who else? Jerry?
Yeah, I'm Jerry Nolet, 724 Frank Smith Road. And to follow up on my friend Barry Brooks, who mentioned the long-range plan, and you mentioned it a couple of times, Paul. I was a member of that long-range plan, and we spent dearly for that plan. And I recall what we were told as the sort of the symbol of Longmeadow, and the highlight of the plan was Longmeadow likes being Longmeadow. That was the thesis. Now, I am on the planning board, have been on the planning board, no longer on the planning board. However, for 2 years, that plan sat on the shelf, but I was adamant. There are 85 action steps in that plan. And I, working with the planning board, we did knock off some of those long-range parts of the long-range plan. However, like most plans, as we all know, kind of tend to sit on the shelf. But it's, to my knowledge, it's still an active plan, and I would encourage you, Paul, to be sure, whether it's on the steering committee, we have planning board, which is an elected board in this community. Now, we don't have a planning manager per se. Many communities do, but Longmeadow does not. But it has an elected planning board, and I really think that they ought to be included in this process.
Absolutely. And our planning members, our planning director is our town manager, Pie Charter. You can come back up, Susan. Come on up.
Okay. I didn't mention that we do have a $300,000 grant towards redoing the tennis courts, and the total maybe would be $500,000 into, and what it would cost us to invest in a building that has been there for a long time, a metal building, doesn't have a life indefinitely, and he's having a very tough time trying to sell it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Come on up.
I'm John Dowd, 1390 Long Meadow Street. Any consideration given for a multi-purpose year-round field? As you know, we have tremendous demand for our fields in town, and the conditions most of the time are deplorable.
Yeah, no.
I mean,
No,
dangerous.
Mr. Dowd is one of those individuals like myself that's been out there coaching. You see your kids play, the teams playing in mud, and when they're 8 years old, they think it's cool, and when they're, in 8th grade, it's not so fun. But, John, we were talking about, and I don't know when you came in, but talking about the, if you look at Grand Meadows, there's a potential to put in an indoor turf field in there in part of the complex that was burnt out, so to speak. The other thing that, we talk about not planning is you put in, we have on the agenda $80,000 or so for a track at the high school, and we've never talked about a turf field at the high school. And no, right, yeah, but I mean, when you talk about as part of a building project or something, you talk about a revenue enhancement project for the town. And what I'm what I'm looking at is, I haven't thought about it here. There's a lot of room in this plan, so to speak, to consider something like that. And the issue that I have is that's what I would look for a steering committee to look at. Is there a place to place it on here, for example? Turf fields, even though they're somewhat expensive to install, I think my DPW director who's here would agree is that the maintenance is a heck of a lot less than it is on a regular field, and you have the potential to rent that field out for events and tournaments like they do up in Holyoke and Westfield State, which brings revenue into the town to help offset some of the maintenance costs with it. But you also have the ability to practice on it year-round, if the weather permitted. It's something that you can even, I don't know what's frozen out there now, but if there was a turf field, you might be able to plow that off right now and let lacrosse teams out there as opposed to practice in the gym and that type of thing. I think that's when I talked about some of these things being a little short-sighted on, we take the discussion to one level and then it comes obviously down to money all the time. And that's why this doesn't talk about money. It talks about projects that are already slated for town in some way, shape, or form, and says if you map them out, and again, the biggest obstacle to this plan will be people in this room and on the select board and other boards that say we can't do this. And my question is, my answer back to them was we're going to do it. The difference is we can do it without looking at revenue enhancers that help pay the bills. And we can look at it piecemeal, which means none of this will ever get done in its entirety in our lifetimes. So the issue is standing up and saying it makes sense to look at something like this. I'm not saying this. I'm not the brightest bulb in the shed, okay? So I know that, and there's much smarter people out there than me that can look at this and say, this is how we do it in a better format. So what I'm looking for, and I have less than 30 seconds, is that, like I said, I'm going to ask the select board for three steps, which is the bylaw change that we're already looking at for the water tower property, look into the bylaw change necessary for the Wolf Swamp Fields and the act of the legislature that it would need to be done to convert that into another use, and to also look to put together a steering committee of residents in town to look at this and discuss the feasibility of a plan like this. Not a dollar amount has to be spent between now and then at the end result of this, but what can come out of it is it could be for the betterment of the town. Everybody might have to have a little give in everything, but if you're looking at what's better for the town, it might make this plan go a little bit through a little bit easier. So, real quick, pardon? I'm not going to post this on the website until I present it to the select board. And then as soon as I do, I'm going to hopefully get on the agenda in the next couple of meetings, and then it'll be online. Because I don't have access to the website in the sense that it's not the town's item yet, but I would put it online once we make the presentation. Thank you for coming. I want to say thank you to LCTV, and again, I want to thank Rich Foster, who worked with me on this and putting it together, and also Yem Lip, who helped out in some of the slides and give me the photos for that. So thank you for coming and participating. Have a good night.